So welcome to today's podcast. Thanks for joining me as always. I really appreciate you listening. Hopefully you're getting some good value out of this as just share my experiences around things that hopefully help you think differently about your wealth and the meaning of it and maximize its use for shaping the life you want to enable. And so today's topic, it kind of comes off the heels of a recent trip I took with my wife and my son, and we went on a fun college trip. Let's go see some colleges, see if it's a right fit, and explore much more deeply the possibility. And as we in this recording, obviously, college today there's a lot of discussion around it, whether it's truly worth it anymore. Right, the costs have become extremely expensive. I mean, you can go up to, nearly six figures a year for some colleges, which is seemingly incredible, right? So it is worth it, the time and effort to explore it, to see if it's a proper fit for folks to and kids to kind of move into. But when we went on the trip, we went down south, and it was just to obviously give some exposure to allow our son to experience it, and obviously for us too, my wife and I, to experience and see what it's like, right? We get so can be sort of isolated in our bubbles and where we live, and so it's always good to kind of go out there and see. So it really, as I've reflected on the trip itself, and it was very enjoyable. It really reminded me of a whole host of different areas of our personal lives and certainly our financial lives that really came to light, and really reinforced it for myself, for sure, in our family. And so I wanted to share some of these sort of thoughts with you, and hopefully have you thinking about it as well. You may be in that sort of boat thinking about it, whether you're building up assets to be able to pay for college, or you're in the midst of dealing with it directly with kids going to college. I really think this might be helpful to help you shape your thinking around what this investment and endeavor looks like, or could mean for your children, and certainly your future family wealth. And so, from a starter perspective, as I sort of alluded to at the beginning, a lot of this was about exposure, right? Because I think this is where, especially with kids who are younger, especially, there might be some that really know their path. They know their purpose in life and where they want to kind of spend their next at least 4 years, 5 years, and then future jobs, and they have that vision sort of laid out. But I think most kids, and I reflect on myself, in when I was that young, there was no way in heck I knew what the heck I wanted to do, or my purpose in life, and where I wanted to devote my time and energy and learning. So this is more about gaining exposure, and it to me, it was enlightening to see my kids and the kid see these things and express himself, and what he saw and what he liked and didn't like, and really helped his thinking. Is he there yet? Of course not, but it's certainly moved the ball quite a bit, and it shows for him what's possible. And he had to kind of fit it into what schools that he could likely get into, what he would need to do to get into those schools, and what's unique about them in those environments. And again, this is really about the best fit, and sort of lining up to kind of what's unique about the child. And so it was really good to gain that exposure so they can absorb it for themselves. And when we think about our personal financial lives, we can easily get thrown into a little bit of bubble and not learn anymore, right? You kind of go with the flow. It still surprised me sometimes. I come across people who are, said, no, I know enough, and I don't want to do anything else. And I get it. We get so comfortable in what we're doing sometimes. We have to almost force ourselves to kind of broaden our horizons, see more, because there's might be many opportunities that we will never come across, because we kind of just stay in our little bubbles, and we have this confirmation bias. We want to sort of do what's always been working, and I understand that part. But I think it's still key for all of us, and me included, to constantly be looking outside of what we're currently doing in other areas, not just for shiny object syndrome, but to maybe evolve how we're thinking about things, and test our theories and philosophies on things to make sure it still stands. Because what I do know is that world is constantly changing. We need to evolve with it, or things will fall behind. Think about AI, right? Same thing. If you're thinking about AI as this bad thing and it's going to ruin the world, and you ignore it and don't sort of embrace it, the likelihood is you're going to probably fall behind, right? That's just the reality. So this is just a reminder to constantly get exposure to things and explore them, because you never know when those opportunities might actually suit you better, right? In life, I've came across folks recently who are just, working like crazy in their jobs, and their kids are growing up too fast, right? Which is always the case, even though they're young, and before you know it, they're going to be going to college, right? Just like my kids are now. So it goes by so fast, and they're thinking, what else can I consider? How can our lives change? How can we change our lives to better suit the life we really want? And certainly the financial life specifically to support it. And so, but you need to get exposed to things so you can adapt and figure out what is best. So I think a lot of people don't make bad decisions broadly, especially around their finances, but they're making decisions based on limited information, limited awareness. And just like anything else in life, if you're playing with less information, the likelihood is you may not be making the best decisions that you could. You're not optimizing things. So really key to sort of embrace that and continue to absorb more information, because you got to kind of evolve and stay ahead of things. So the second area that I found it was a little amusing to me, and again, this is sometimes we get rooted in things in our lives and we grow up, and it's sometimes hard to change our thinking. And I could admit there was always a piece of me when I was growing up to be very cost conscious. It was a little bit of the opposite when my parents grew up. So I kind of almost took the opposite approach, and you could always scrutinize things from a cost perspective. And I've grown out of that to some degree to kind of be more expansive around that. But, sometimes it creeps back into, especially when you're thinking about college. When you're thinking about the 4 year, or hopefully only, but maybe more, the cost of it can be enormous. So it becomes right in your face. But just like anything in our financial lives too, like we can only be enamored by the cost, and we don't think about the broader return or the impact that it could have for us, um, outside of just kind of the cost element of it. So think about college, right? My wife brought this up. She was just, you know, God, what's the net cost to us to maybe go to some of these different types of schools? And yes, that's an important piece of the puzzle, but the other end of it is what the impact could be long term, right? We can get so narrow near term. What's the cost to us today out of pocket? But forget about what the long term impact could be, to exposure to the network of that school, or the environment that fosters his development and motivation and growth, right? It's hard to put a number to those things, but that is a return that could have decades and lifetimes of impact that maybe is tough to sort of quantify, but it's definitely bigger than just thinking about a cost perspective. And we can easily get caught up in that too in our financial lives, right? Because we want to reduce our taxes, right, as much as possible. Some people are very much super focused on just cutting costs around that as much as I can, and not thinking about maybe it's a design issue in my financial life and where I'm saving, investing, and thinking about that broadly. Maybe I need to examine that to mitigate some taxes as a byproduct of that, right? So we get so cost focused that we may sort of miss a bigger opportunity or return that is available to us. And you know, thinking about protections in place, like people are going to pay the least amount for insurances because it's painful, right? You don't think you're going to use these things until you do. But I've often shared with folks the importance of doing and assessing: are you adequately prepared, protected against very catastrophic things in your life, so that you can hyper focus on the areas of growth and opportunity because you're fully protected, versus a lot of people are just putting their head in the sand and don't even know what they have in terms of protections. And what would be the worst time to find that out, right? When you actually need it. And so these are types of things when you think more longer term about things, that these are key areas to think of the bigger picture of it. A lot of things in my life I've come to realize that there's a reason why things are cheap and inexpensive. It's because a lot of them don't last for very long. They may feel good initially because they feel cheaper and you feel like you got a deal on it. But I think just like anything, there might be a cost to on their other side of it. And so whether it's cheap now, and expensive later, cheap now and expensive later, or spending the time and energy and cost upfront, it'll be hopefully cheaper on the other end because you prepared and you're planning for the future. So you got to figure out where you want to play with those things. So, it takes a different sort of lens to sort of get that longer term vision of things. But I would encourage you to think of that certainly for a lot of things you're doing in your financial life, like where you might be trying to really just clip what's that, step over dollars and pick up pennies. And what are some things you can consider going long term that could have huge returns and impact, like investing in your future, like our kids. What kind of return could that have for our families long run, right? For their independence and their earning capacity. And we don't want to make that big mistake now, just try to make it cheap, right? We have to think bigger about that. A big thing too, kind of related to the not thinking about just the expensive things, thinking of the opportunity and return. You know, the price tag of college can be very scary, and some people get into it without deep thought and maybe get into these massive amounts of debt, and regrettably so, that unfortunately has happened probably more often than people want to admit. And so this is a very serious discussion to go through and contemplate. And there are different paths now. Obviously, school isn't for everybody, and obviously we're not going to go deep into that conversation, at least on this episode, but you really do need to spend time, and more time than probably people give it, but it's important, and it sort of reminded us as we reflect back on even this consideration on this trip, is how we're using money as a tool, right? Money can oftentimes be the uh, thing we're chasing, the goal that we're trying to amass for whatever reason, retirement, whatever, financial freedom. But we can easily get caught in a path of just chasing money, and sometimes at the sacrifice of our lives. And so, what I want to sort of instill with you is thinking about money a little bit differently. We say we're going to move money to something, to save, to pay for college, and then we drain it and it kind of goes away. And then we kind of have to resave and invest more, versus money through people, not to, but through. And it's a really core concept that I think is not often really talked about, because, when we think about wealth transfer, which is probably the biggest thing that will be happening soon, with so much money being saved and accumulated at certainly the upper echelons of families, is that we're going to just potentially provide an inheritance, right? We're going to give money to them, to our kids, and prepare. And at least that's one part of the equation, right? Estate planning, all those sorts of things. We're moving things to folks, and that's usually the primary focus. Let me reduce estate taxes, or the friction that we have to that may occur when we're transferring wealth. But we often don't think about the sort of softer side of things, is preparing our kids to steward that wealth productively in future generations, right? For their families or great grandchildren, whatever, the next generations, to prepare them to receive that money, to use it wisely, to align to, your family values and mission in life, right? As a family. And so, those are, that not my mind is the bigger need that needs to be addressed alongside of transferring the wealth, right? We want to give them the most, but we got to also understand and train our kids in the next generation how to use it wisely, for what purpose, how to position money. And a lot of that goes with exposure, expanding and showing our kids these things earlier in the game, so they can feel vested in it, prepared, right? You're preparing them to understand how these dollars and resources will be used as they're earning it themselves over time, or how that money gets transferred down the road. And that can help spur this sort of ripple effect down multiple generations, if that matters for you, by leading that charge, right? It's our jobs as parents to lead our children so they're going to be better than us, and future generations are even better than we are, right? Think about some of the most famous families that have continued to be able to do this, like the Rockefeller family, right? They've built, and their family's still connected because they work together to continue to perpetuate wealth and build things together as a family, and wealth, versus somewhere like the Vanderbilt family. You hear this, that, you know, the, money worth billions at a time. He passed away, Cornelius, but then over years that money just dissipated and got spread out. And then at some point, there wasn't one millionaire left in the whole family. So watching that wealth, and maybe it took more generations because they had a lot of wealth, but for a vast majority of people, it could be a generation or two, and that money goes all away, right? And so for you, I would encourage you to think a little bit deeply about this. What if you could actually start that train that builds wealth for generations and generations, however many that is to you, 3, 5, 7, that it only continue to go up, right? And that requires us to think a little bit differently about how we can transfer the wisdom, exposure, knowledge, right, and values through our next generations, right? And having them take the torch and continue it on and continue to perpetuate that. And a lot of these, even something as seemingly innocent as going on a college trip, is doing that. It's helping to obviously expose them to things, but have deeper conversation. And this is a significant commitment in investing in our biggest asset, which is us and our people, right? Our families, those around us, right? These are massive investments that hopefully will, you know, bear out fruit down the road, but it's also on helping them shape the way they think about money, and the impact they have in this world, and that hopefully using money for good, right? And that they can shepherd it and steward it in a very mindful way, and that's aligned to kind of what matters to your own family. So something to consider. It really brought that back to light for us as we sort of reflected on our trip and the meaning of it all, right? It isn't just getting into college. It's actually getting our next generation starting to think through their responsibility to steward wealth beyond, certainly my lifetime, but to take the torch for the future generations. So another area that sort of we kind of hit on this a little bit earlier around exposure is, my son's somewhat more reserved and quieter, and some of this is to expose him so he can voice his opinions about things and get him out of his comfort zone, right? Just like a lot of us, we can easily fall prey to comfort. It's a natural state that we want to be in, to not be stressed. And you know things like college and thinking about our futures can be very stressful, right? You'd hope that it would be much more exciting, right? The opportunity to be able to shape your life and grow, but it can be very stressful. And so this exposed that to some degree, that yes, to kind of strive and get what you want, you do sometimes need to get out of your comfort zone, right? To be able to grow, to learn, and to push yourself to in a positive stressful manner, right? I think stress can be good if used productively and thought of productively. And so this trip was meant to kind of highlight a bit of that. Some of these places are enormous with lots of potential, but you can easily get sort of intimidated by it all, right? And shrink down and go back to that comfort zone. So there's a nice balance to all of this, but as it relates to even our financial lives, we can easily, as we talked about earlier, kind of stay in our lane and go with what is the typical financial advice because it's comfortable, right? And the environments that are being pushed upon us, want to keep us in there, right? It's part of how the system has been designed. But the reality for folks who are looking to expand and want more, this is where the exposure to other areas outside of what you know is so key, because that will is where the learning is going to come. Yes, will there be mistakes? Of course, right? But that's what will perpetuate the growth long term, and the wiser people are getting. So it's really taking that approach and philosophy that we will need to come across areas of discomfort, obstacles, and that's a good sign. And it's something that I've certainly espoused and sort of adopted even for myself, because you need to sort of test yourself a little bit, challenge yourself. And, along the way, you're going to only evolve and improve. And if you take it from that lens, and that's the same thing with education, right? Or our financial lives. It's just that constant motion, compounding, and growth is so key, and sometimes it requires some discomfort. So kind of one of the last ideas around this I want to share is sometimes we can easily default to what you're supposed to do, right? Go to college, get a good job, all those things that we just say you're supposed to do without really thinking about. And it might be the right move. I'm not saying that. It just but questioning it on from time to time, and using it as a mechanism to guide and design our lives. In the world we live in today, and again, I try to hark back when I was thinking about going to college. I was clueless, right? I didn't see the world, didn't know much, right? And our parents were just doing the best they could, but they really weren't tremendous guides around it because they didn't know as much around it. But now, in the world we live in today, with so much information out there, it can be daunting. So many opportunities and directions you can go. It may be very scary to start thinking about that. Imagine you can design your life in a way that brings the most joy on a daily basis, gets you motivated to wake up every morning to serve however you're serving, and interacting whoever you want to interact with. I mean, that can be very stressful, right? But to design our lives, design our financial lives requires us to face things, right? To explore, to not ignore certain things, right? Because we don't want to talk about them. Like the thing that I always harp on is death. Like that's just a fact. It's what's that thing? The only thing of certain, only two things certain: death and taxes, and nobody likes to talk about either of them. But things like death it then pushes us to think, okay, how can we design our days and our lives in a way that we get the most out of it while we're here? Because we don't know how long we're here, and that's just a reality. And you don't dwell on it; you just admit it and sort of face it and say, okay, now it's time to start thinking about how can we design our lives to be more intentional? How do we design our financial lives to best enable the things that we want the most, right? It's our job to do that and instill that in our kids, and we got to live that, right? Because it's easy to drift into something that is less meaningful. And I had that even for myself personally, portions of my life where it just kind of you were in robot mode. And hopefully with AI coming in the board to be able to do a lot of things for us, hopefully that allows us to step back from things and be more human and craft things and design our lives to be, how we would want them, and to be able to get the most out of every single day we're here. We're able to produce and enjoy life in a way that is on our terms. And I think most people want that if they understood how. And so I would really encourage you to consider that even for yourself. Is your life designed in a way that you optimally want? What are things you could do to help move in that direction and evolve that over time? So I hopefully these sorts of insights get you thinking, help you sort of review kind of where you stand to now on just your personal financial life and how it's supporting, your overall life, and whether there's areas to explore. And, starting off first is being grateful. There's probably good things going on, right? That we can always overlook because it doesn't take very long to find problems. We all have them. And so, but being grateful obviously is key to kind of have that positivity. But when I think about money, it's really about how we're using it optimally to sort of maximize our contribution, impact, and our enjoyment of life. And whether it's talking about college, taxes, or investing, the question is pretty much the same. Are you moving money to your life, right? To pay for things, to afford life, or are you creating higher levels of meaning as you're investing in putting money through things, through your family, through experiences, through things that are going to perpetuate for longer term? That's really a key element to start thinking much broader and deeper about what your money can do for you and almost put money in its place. It's there to serve you and serve the life that you were always meant to live. So thanks for joining me on this episode, and I wish you the best, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks for joining me on this episode today. I really am grateful for you as listeners to the Perennial Pride podcast. I hope you're getting some tremendous value out of it and hopefully pushing you along your journey to financial freedom. I put this podcast together really to help you get more educated around your finances so that you feel empowered to live the life that you really want. And if you like the content that you heard today or watched, then I would encourage you to go to my website, perennialpride.com. There's tons of other content there. And you can access my book, Wealth Beyond the Numbers. You can buy it there on my website. It's a aggregation of a lot of great tips and tools I've learned to not only build my wealth in my accounts, but build wealth in my life and abundance and joy, and something that has a lot of my experiences in the journey that I've been on personally. Hopefully that can be also of value to you as you sort of move forward. So thanks again for being a Perennial Pride listener, and we'll see you on the next episode.